So, hello everybody. We have the pleasure today to have as speaker Mathieu Josiat Burgess from CNRS. He was since January 2020 affiliated with the IF Institute for Research in Fundamental Computer Science at Paris City, France. Mathieu Josiat is research focuses in combinatorial structures arising from problems in computer science, mathematics, or physics. To tackle these problems, he employs techniques such as bijections, generating functions, random generation, algorithms, and asymptotic techniques. These methods involve enumerating combinatorial objects such as partitions, permutations, trees, maps, and graphs, while also exploring connections with number theory, combinatorial physics, and probability theory. Today's talk is titled Markov Chains Coming from Cards Shipping. Before we begin, I want to emphasize that questions are welcome at any time during or after the talk. Our speakers are committed to answering all inquiries even via email. I extend the sincere gratitude to Mathieu Josiat for agreeing to speak at our webinar, and also, despite the personal circumstances that he had recently, he has kept his promise that the talk will take place today. Thank you again, Mathieu, and please, you can start.
So, okay, thank you, Rafik. Thanks a lot for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak in an international environment, thanks to Zoom, because I don't travel much. Okay. Thank you. So, as I said, Rafik, I will talk about Markov chains. It's so basic probability theory. And the point is to start from a card shuffling. It's very combinatorial, so you will see. So how to shuffle a deck of cards? Let me introduce the subject. So we talk about rifle shuffles. So you have two steps. You split your deck of cards. A deck of cards is just a sequence of integers from 1 to n. So you can say it's a permutation of the integer from 1 up to n in two blocks, and you permute these two blocks while preserving the order on each block. Let's just see an example. You have this deck of cards, 5, 1, 3, 2, 8, etc. First, you split the deck of cards. You have 5, 1, 3, that's the first block, and 2, 8, etc. That's the second block. When you shuffle, when you permute the card, you shuffle by preserving the order. So the green block stays 5, 1, 3, and the orange block stays like 2, 8, 4, 6, etc. Okay, each block is preserved.
And why you choose only 2, 8 to permute with the 5? Why not 2, 8, 4? Or at random you choose the length of the sequence of the block?
There are plenty of different shuffles, so there are plenty of different possibilities. This is just an example.
Okay.
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 Okay. Okay. So let me to complete the picture. Let me just say that to encode this shuffle, you can just encode this by the position of the green letters in this final word here. Okay. Which means that the number of non-trivial shuffles is 2 to the n minus n minus 1. What does it mean? You take any subset of this integer between a subset of the positions here, but you require that the subset is different from is not an initial subset. Okay? Because, for example, if your subset is just 1 to 3, you will stay in this position. So what you get is a trivial shuffle. It does not permute anything. Are we good?
Yes.
Okay. So now the general idea what we want to do is just start from some initial permutation 1, 2, 3 up to 1, or more generally, you take some distribution on the symmetric group, perform k shuffles for some integer k independently and uniformly to get nice properties, and you get a permutation sigma k. And the question is the following: for which values of k do we get a truly random deck of cards? This is just think of this as a very practical application. You have you make plenty of shuffles. After plenty of shuffle, you imagine it's impossible. You don't know anything about the deck of cards. It's a truly random permutation. Okay, which means in mathematical terms that the distribution is close to the uniform distribution on the symmetric group. And of course, when k is large, you expect this to hold. Voilà. So now let's formalize this by taking an element in the symmetric group algebra, big E. It's defined as a formal sum of permutations. You take the formal sums of sigma, which is a non-trivial shuffle of the identity permutation, 1 to 3 up to n. Okay, you divide by the total number of such elements, because you want this to encode a probability distribution, so the sum of the coefficients is 1. Okay. Now we are in the symmetric group algebra. You can compute the product e to the k, and basically this is also a probability distribution on the symmetric group that you can identify with a case convolution of the initial distribution. That's a basic property of what is a convolution on a probability distribution on the group. What you get is a distribution after k shuffles. Okay, are we good? If we if you have any question, please stop me. And now in this,
just a question. Okay,
yes?
2 to the power n, but why minus n minus 1? What represents n plus 1? Why you...
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, the question is here. When you want to do a non-trivial shuffle, so just for example, in my first step here, split the deck of cards. You have 5, 1, 3, and you shuffling. You choose where goes the 5, where goes the 1, and where goes 3. Okay, and this is any subsets of three position in the world here. Okay, but if your subset is 1, 2, 3, the initial positions, when well, it's then what you get is just what you started from 5, 1, 3, so it does not move at all. So it means if your subset is just something like that, what you get is a trivial shuffle. It's an identity. Nothing moves. Okay, so if you want to only consider non-trivial shuffles, you have to remove this. Okay. So now there is a criterion for a case convolution on a group to converge onto the uniform distribution. And for example, if n is equal to 2, the non-trivial shuffles will just say 1, 2, 2, 1, 1, 2, 2, 1. So it's not very interesting. You have to distinguish this case. But in general, if n is bigger than 2, there will be convergence to the uniform distribution. So there is an old paper by Adamar. It's difficult to read because it's an old style mathematics, old style probability, but basically this is the idea by Adamar. Okay. So let me go on. Very much more recently, let me mention the result by Bayer and Diaconis. So most of this talk is inspired by work of Diaconis. Bayer and Diaconis showed that there is a cutoff phenomenon. So what does it mean? Which means that when the shuffle is roughly this number, 3 over 2 log of n, there is a cutoff. What means a cutoff is that when k is smaller than this threshold, the distribution of sigma to the k is relatively far from the uniform distribution. But as soon as you are above this 3/2 log of n, we are very close to the uniform distribution. Like there is no picture here, but it's like you have a curve. The curve is really going very fast to the uniform distribution. There is something called the total variation distance between the distribution on the symmetric group. Okay. So there are some reference. I'll do some diaconese about shuffling cards on the stopping times. Bayer and diaconese trailing the dovetail shuffle to Whistler. It's very beautiful paper, and that's really accessible and very really interesting. So now let me introduce just another model, a slightly different model of a Markov chain. It's the following. It's a Zetlin library. So now it's a bit different. So once again, we are on a symmetric group on permutation of 1 up to n. But now we are given some probabilities pi associated to the integer I. Okay. If you start from the permutation sigma 1 up to sigma I, the idea is that with probability pi, the integer I is moved to the left extremity at the beginning of the stack, which means, okay, let's just see on the example. We have still from this permutation with probability P4, I will take this 4 here and extract here and put it in front of the sequence here. So this is another model which was studied by Hendricks, and we computed a stationary distribution of this interesting Markov chain. It's different because here it's not a random walk on the symmetric group. Here, if you examine what is the permutation here, it's not the convolution of a distribution on the symmetric group, except in the very particular case described in this remark, when pi equal to 1 over n. Once again, we have the power of some element in the symmetric group algebra and convergence to the uniform distribution. But in general, outside this case, there is no convergence to the uniform distribution. For example, if say P4 is very high, well, in general, 4 will be very often at the beginning of the sequence, which means in the library, the 4 is my favorite book. Okay. So on the point of describing these two different models, which are somewhat similar but not completely, is that there is a very general construction which encompasses everything here, and it's related with hyperplane arrangements, which are just a finite set of hyperplanes in R to the n, and there's a very nice result from these people, Bidikare, Hanlon, and Rockmore. Combinatorial description of the spectrum of the Zetlin library. The Zetlin library was really the motivating example here, and the generalization. Some other paper by Brown and Diaconese. So what is interesting is that this construction is very general. So, and you can consider plenty of different hyperplane arrangements and try to see what are the associated Markov chain. So this is more or less the end of the introduction. So now I will move into more precise definition on the details about how to define this Markov chains from hyperplane arrangements. Okay. But let me just start with an important example where we have permutations, because that's more concrete in some sense. So to consider this case, we have the following. So Hij is a hyperplane with equation xi equals xj. In this vector space, V is R to the n, and we quotient by this vector with where all the coordinates are equal. Okay, so this is a minor technical detail, because when you consider these hyperplanes, H, H, Ij, they all contain this vector here. So it's convenient to just quotient by this vector. And what is a very important object in hyperplane arrangement is the braid arrangement. It's just a set of this hyperplane in this vector space. It's related with the braid group, but it's not really not the topic of this talk. And it's related with the symmetric group. I will explain you very shortly why it's related with the symmetric group. The second example that I will consider here is called the Boolean arrangement in R to the n. It's very simple, but it's very important to understand this case because it's a nice example. You can consider this as a toy example, but it really helps to understand the definitions and what happens the general theory. It's just a set of hyperplanes xi equals to 0. So I have the coordinate hyperplanes. They are all perpendicular to each other. So this is a picture of the braid arrangement A3. So the coordinates are x1 equal, the hyperplane are x1 equal x2, x2 equal x3, and so on. So it's nice because we can make picture in a 2 dimension. We have 3 coordinates, but because we quotient by this vector 1, 1, 1, we are in a dimension 2. We can make picture. And what happens here is that in the braid arrangements, if we just consider the connected components of the complements of the hyperplanes. So here we have 6 regions that we call the chambers. And because it's a complement of the hyperplane with this equation, we can describe an equation for this chamber as a set of strict inequalities. So for example, just imagine here we have the line, the hyperplane x2 equals x3. So on this side, we have the equation x2 strictly smaller than x3. So which is part of these equations here. So in general, when you have one of these connected components, it's completely described by a sequence of strict inequalities here, described by a permutation. So in particular, the number of chambers is n factorial. It's the number of permutations. So you can index this by 1 to 3, and this by 2, 1, 3, and so on. And because this is a very highly symmetric picture, the symmetric group acts just by permutation of the coordinates. Each hyperplane Hij is invariant. Well, it's not invariant, but it goes to another hyperplane. So globally, the set of hyperplane is invariant. Okay. And this is a simply transitive action, which means that if you take just one particular chamber here, every other chamber will be a sigma of this fundamental chamber. So let me now go on and more deeply in what is this hyperplane arrangement. So for each hyperplane Hij, the complement divides my vector space, like the ambient space, in 2 components, 2 connected components. You have a positive on the negative side, Hij plus and minus. And by convention, so let's say I fix a fundamental chamber here, which is the increasing chamber, so where the entries are increasing. And we decide that the positive side of a hyperplane is the one containing the positive side. Excuse me, is there a question or?
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay, sorry, no problem. Now I consider face of the arrangement. So what is a face? is a subset that you can describe as an intersection of either hyperplane or the positive or the negative side of an hyperplane. And what does it mean concretely? It means that you have chambers, but you also consider a face of smaller dimension. Like, for example, you have this boundary here, this half line is a face, and you have this dot at the origin, which is also a face. You have a face of every dimension. You have 0 dimensional is just the origin, this dot. Your half lines will be 1 dimensional. This cone, 2-dimensional cone is another face, etc. So in a higher dimensional picture, each face will be a cone. Okay, and this divides the vector space in what we call there is a structure of like face and the smaller face and everything. So some people call this a fan, but I don't really need the terminology. Okay. So now let's go into the combinatorial side of this construction. I said that faces are in bijection with ordered partition of 1 up to n. It's a set partition, but with a total order on the blocks. Okay. So for example, in H7, I will not make a picture because the dimension is too high. Consider 1 to 4 is the first block, 3, 6, and 5. And you associate this face, we have a set of equalities like x1 equals x2 equals x4, and so on, strictly smaller than x3 equals x6, and so on. And this is a face. If you want, if you take this, just think a little, you can write this as an intersection of hyperplane. You have h1, 2, h2, 4, and so on, and the positive side of h43, and so on. So this is a face. So, for example, you can make the picture work for n equals 3. Consider order third partitions of size 3 and see what happens with this picture. Okay. Now, let me just briefly say where I am going. I will define this product. It's a product on this face here. This will define a monoid structure on the set of faces. On this monoid structure, the product will be used to define the Markov chain. Okay, this is where I am going. So let me define this product. It's defined on the set of faces, not the chambers, but all the faces. So let's f and f prime be faces of this hyperplane arrangement. What you do is the following. In the example, I have chosen this one half line here on this 2-dimensional cone here. So you choose one element, one vector v in the first face, v is in the half line, v prime in the other face. Now, for some epsilon, like really small, you take some convex combination, W. It's a convex combination of v and v prime, but very close to v. It's 1 minus epsilon for a small epsilon. So you start from v, you go slightly in the direction of v prime, and you arrive somewhere. This is W. And the point is, this W arrives in another phase of the arrangement here. W arrives in this 2-dimensional cone. And by the definition, this 2-dimensional cone will be the product f dot f prime. So this defines a product on the faces. Okay. You can define this on any hyperplane arrangement. So I mostly focus on the braid arrangement, but you can define this in very general situation. So for example, we can do more example to understand what is this product. Okay. So let's compute this very, very important example. In A9, in the braid arrangement, you have let's take, I take this 1-dimensional face corresponding to the ordered partition 1, 2, 4, 6, 3, 4, 7, etc. So this is represented by the vector this vector in the ambient space. Like 1, 2, 4, 6 correspond to the smaller entries, and the other indices to the bigger entries, which are all equal. Now, and you make the product with an n-dimensional face. The face of a maximal dimension recalls that they are indexed by permutation. This was this picture. These are really permutations. And for this, we have, this is represented by this vector here. I'm taking the inverse permutation for some technical reason. It means like, for example, in position 3, I have the smallest element. In position 4, I have the second smallest element. In position 8, the third smallest element, etc. Now, just compute 1 minus epsilon times v plus epsilon v prime, and you try to compute what is the relative order between these. So when you work out the example, you will see that, for example, here to see for the smallest entry, they will correspond to 0 and 2. The second smallest entry here will correspond to 0 and 5, then 0, 7, 0, 8. This corresponds to the fact that when I'm doing this product, here in the first position I have the smallest entry, in the first position I have the second smallest entry, and so on. Okay. Now this is related with shuffles, because this is very important remark. I am doing this product that I defined in the this product. If you take this permutation, then this is a shuffle of this permutation on the left. To note this, just consider 4, 1, 2, 6. You have here 4, 1, 2, 6, and then 3, 8, 5, 7, 9. Okay, so this is a shuffle. Okay, so this is the link between the geometric construction and the shuffles of permutation. Okay, so there are plenty of nice properties of stuff that you can do with this product. So the neutral element is a 0-dimensional face. You can check this. I will not explain all of this because it requires a bit of time, but it can be just a small exercise to check what are the properties of this product. Okay. Let me just make a picture with not too much formula, but how do we understand what is associativity of this product using the definition in terms of the epsilon and everything? So let's compute on one side these products, xy times z. So x corresponds to v, y to v prime, and z to v second. So when I do x times y, I'm going in this direction, I arrive at this dot. I make the product with z, I arrive here. And the point is this dot here in the middle. So it represents the product here. But there is another way to see it at this product. If I first compute the product y times z, it will be represented by this dot here. And then x times y times z is this product here. Okay. If you are careful with what are the epsilons, what are the values of the epsilon, you will see that the same dot represents the two different products. And again, so we can prove various property of this product. So one important property is okay, it's associative. It's very natural. It's important to have at least associativity to do things like. So it's not a group, but at least it's an associative monoid, which is a more natural, which is a natural. An interesting property that I will use later is the following: x times y times x is equal to x times a. Let me just check this. If x is represented by v and y by v prime, you compute x times y you arrive at this dot, and then you go back in the other direction to have the product x, y, x. And basically, you can understand this is the same thing as x times y. Okay, so it's maybe not very enlightening what are these small picture, but you know, the big formulas with epsilon are maybe not better. So let me go back now to random walks, because this is really the subject of this talk. Okay. If you have just any question on this product, it's good, but I think it's better to now just go back to what are the random walks associated with this object. So what is the point? So we start now from mu, which is a distribution on all the faces of the arrangement. The random walk is defined on the chambers. Okay. If you think about the example of the braid arrangement, recall that the chambers are the one indexed by permutations. We have other smaller objects of smaller dimension, but permutations, they are really the chambers. So, and in the general framework, the random walk will be on the chambers. And so, for example, for the braid arrangement, you get random walks on the permutations. So you start from x0, that's the initial chamber. It might be a random chamber x0, and the distribution is given by this formula. So we have this transition matrix. The probability to go from C to C prime is given by a sum over the faces F such that Fc equals C prime. And you take the sum of this mu of F. Which is a very natural thing, and maybe an even more natural thing to write this, to describe it like this: xi. The ith element of the random walk is just you take start from x0 and you multiply by f1, f2, and so on up to fi, where all these elements fj are independently chosen with respect to the distribution mu. So this is a natural way to define a random walk on a group, or here a monoid. So let me just work out one example. Still, again in dimension 2, because we can really see what happens. So this is the braid arrangement of size 3 in 2 dimensions. So we have the 6 chambers here, corresponding to the 6 permutation of size 3. So let's check maybe one column or just one row of the transition matrix. So if you start from 1, you have the product A times 1. You start from here, you go here, you arrive in the chamber 1. If you start from B, you take the product with 1, you arrive in the chamber 1, which means with probability H plus B, you stay in the chamber 1 if you start from 1. Are we good? What can we do next? If you start from chamber 3, excuse me. So I'm always confused between rows and columns of the matrices, which is I am always confused with this example. So if you start from 1, what is the probability to arrive at 3? One way to do this is to make the product D times 1. If you take D times 1, you arrive in chamber 3, which means, for example, I have this D here in the first column on the third row. Okay. Should I give another example? Like, for example, we have F times 1 equal 6, which means I have this F in the first column on the 6th row. If you compute the whole transition matrix, and you will find that there is a very nice characteristic polynomial. Like it's completely factorized in this form. In particular, there are very nice eigenvalues, which are very simple, just simple sums of the coefficients here, A, B, C, D, and so on. I use the fact that 1 is the sum of all the probabilities. The point of this theory is that this is a very general fact. The transition matrix defined with this model will have very simple eigenvalues. So I will give you the precise statement very soon, but this is just an illustration of these facts. So I'm not going very far in the probability theory side of random walks, but the point is that the eigenvalues of the transition matrix somehow control what happens in the Markov chain. What happens, for example, for the convergence rate of the Markov chain. So another important example to consider is the following. So in the braid arrangement, we define the initial distribution mu on the faces is just supported on the face, on some faces of dimension 1. Okay, so the faces correspond to this ordered set partition. We have one block I on another block which contain everything else, and we give it probability pi for some pi for some numbers that add to 1. So it's not all the one-dimensional faces, but some of them in orbit, so corresponding to the block size 1 and -1. And we can check that the associated Markov chain is the Zetlin library. So really, it explains why we just get the Zetlin library at a particular case. Maybe it's enough with example. Oh, okay, let's go on. Let's go on. Like it's important to understand really what are the examples. And this one is even more simple because it's a Boolean arrangement. So again, let me consider one-dimensional faces in the Boolean arrangement. So let me call them fi plus minus. There are some the vector in the R to the n, where everything is 0 except in position I, Vi, and Vi is required to be positive if we take Fi plus, and Vi is negative in Fi minus. So the chambers here in bijection, you can it's easy to see that there are 2 to the n chambers, and they correspond to sign vector plus minus to the n. Now, again, if we have a measure supported on one-dimensional faces, like mu of fi plus minus is a theta I plus minus, and you consider the random walk. And under some just technical assumptions that for every I, we have either theta I plus or theta I minus, which is strictly positive, which means there is a probability to get fi plus or fi minus. Then the random walk converges to a product distribution. And basically, on the Boolean arrangement, it's a very general fact about Boolean arrangement. Everything is factorized. You can just consider independently what happens in each dimension. And you see that in each dimension, you can compute what happens independently from the other dimension. So you can check that there is an exact formula here for the stationary distribution. Okay, so let's go to some general remark. Still in the Boolean arrangement, when you have a k-dimensional face, it means we have it's a cone where we have k non-zero elements, and all the other entries are 0. So when you take the product, it can change k signs when you make the transformation. Take the product to the left. So it means that this fact of considering y-dimensional faces it's a natural because it's a small step. Most small step, making the product with a one-dimensional face does not move too much the things. Because, okay, that's what I did here. The probabilities are just on one-dimensional face. That was what was done here in the other example. And now let me introduce a general definition that will be useful. It's called separability. So it looks like just some technical condition. So the support of mu is mass initial distribution on no, it's not the initial distribution. It's the distribution that describes the transitions. And the support is a set of faces with a non-zero probability. The separability means that there is no hyperplane H such that it contains all the elements with non-zero probability. Okay, so it's kind of natural thing to do because if we don't have this assumption, there is a hyperplane which contains all the dimensions, all the face with a positive probability, and it's a kind of a degenerate case. So now, what is the general results of Brown of Diaconis? Is the following. It's a kind of an algorithm, if you want. So it goes as follows. You consider a random sequence of faces f1 up to fk. You build this inductively from f1, then f2, and so on, and so on. So fi is chosen randomly according to the distribution mu, but conditionally to the fact that it does not belong to the one that you have already taken. So at the end, what you will get is just an indexing of all the faces with a positive probability. So you go on with this first rule, and the second rule here just means that you stop when you have taken everything in the support of mu. So what you get is just a total order, if you want. It's an indexing of a total order on this support of mu. Now, what you can do is the theorem of Brown of Diaconis is the following. Under this separability assumption, you take the product, the product f1 up to fk. What you get is the chamber. It means the dimension is maximal. It's really dimension is maximal. For example, in the Braid arrangement, you get a permutation. Now, this product, it's a random element, of course, and the distribution of this random element is a stationary distribution of the random walk. And what does it mean? A priori, well, you know, it's a random walk, so it's an infinite sequence. So convergence could be, you know, it's not well. It's just a convergence result, but the point of this theorem is just with a finite number of steps, you can sample what is a uniform distribution. That's the point. And it can be really useful. I mean, you can either sample, okay, of course, you can do algorithm with that. If there is no formula to get a uniform distribution, you can sample it. But it's also useful sometimes to prove theoretical results. Okay, so I will not give you maybe a full detailed proof, but the point is, okay, just let me just be very sketchy here. So xi is just the product here. We start from x0, you multiply by f1, f2, etc. up to fi. And for I big enough, every element in the support appears at least once with a probability close to 1. Okay, so like very natural thing to expect. I is big, so everyone is here. Now, what happens? Everyone is here, but sometimes we have the same elements in different places, like fj equals fg prime for two different indices. But there is this weird properties of the monoid xyx equals xy. And this weird properties it's wonderful because it really permits to simplify the product here. You simplify the product, you can just remove fj prime. And you iterate this, and at the end, you get a sequence, you have a product of some elements here, and you have no repetition. So it's just J1 up to GK with no repetition. Every element in the support appears exactly once. And technical point, this product G1 up to GK, it's a chamber, the dimension is maximal. So when you take the product, you can ignore x0. I will not go in the details about this. This product is a chamber because when you see what are the vectors representing the element in the product, you compute the epsilons and everything, you see that the dimension has to be the maximal. The maximal has to be maximal. So that's it. Basically, this is the proof. This is a way to start from here, from this general element. When I is very big, you see that this element xi is always equal to this product, and the way to describe what are these j is exactly what is given in the theorem here. So it's like a recipe. It's kind of algorithmic. So maybe so another very general theorem. The point is that the stationary distribution is unique if and only if the distribution is separable. Okay? And one case of this theorem is very simple. It's a consequence of the previous theorem. In the separable case, we obtain the stationary distribution by a formula which does not depend on x0. Okay, and in the non-separable case, okay, we can consider there are plenty of different ways to get a different final stationary distribution. Okay, let me just skip this. So there is some more algebraic side of this theory. So I will not give you details about this. I don't have very much time, and it will require to spend more time on to understand what is, for example, the symmetric group algebras, and what are some subalgebras of the symmetric group algebras. Okay, so I will not give details about this, but what is the point? Let me just read this proposition. Sigma n, the symmetry group, it acts by symmetry of the Brett arrangement. And if we have a distribution of mu, which is invariant under this distribution, then the transition matrix is bistochastic. So we can consider what is the transposition, the transposed Markov chain. Okay, what is the point of this proposition? Let me just go back to this example where we computed this product here and arrive at the fact here at this remark that here this permutation here is a shuffle of this one. If you try to see what does the Markov chain on shuffle, it is the other way around. Yeah, you start from element and you perform a shuffle and you iterate this to evolve. When I do the product here, it seems to be the other way around here. Here, this one is a shuffle on the right one. But because there is one case where the transition matrix is bistochastic, you can consider the transpose Markov chain and go in the other way around, which means, for example, start from this one and go to this one. No, start from this one and go to this one. And this is needed to see the Reichfeld shuffle Markov chain as a particular case of the general construction with a hyperplane arrangement. Okay. Okay, so there are some results about the Solomon-Tits algebra. It's a space of a formal sum of faces endowed with a Tits product. I will not give you details about this. Time is a bit running on. I will very quickly jump to the conclusion. But let me just mention this very quickly. This is somehow the final theorem that I want to mention from Biggie-Gary-Hanlon and Roquemort. The point is that it's possible to describe completely what are the eigenvalues of the transition matrix. So there is some lattice here, L of the Braid arrangement. As I mentioned, Braid arrangements are related with ordered set partition, but this lattice here is a lattice of set partitions. So there is a way to see set partitions here. And so it's there is a partial order. And using this, we can define there is a way to compute the eigenvalues of the transition matrix. It uses the Möbius function. I'm sorry, because mu was also a probability distribution, but here is Möbius function of the lattice of the Braid arrangement. And there is a precise way to compute what are the eigenvalues of the transition matrix. Okay. And so this is almost at the end of my talk. So the point is that we have some eigenvalues lambda e indexed by this element of the lattice, which correspond to set partition in the Braid arrangement. And the point of knowing the eigenvalues is that it controls the convergence rate of the Markov chain. So one of the eigenvalues is just one, but we can, it's also possible to compute what are the second largest eigenvalues. And the final theorem of Brown and Diaconis is that, okay, if you have some mu I, a distribution of xi, the I step of the random walk, and use a uniform distribution, then for this total variation distance, which, okay, so there was a definition at the beginning, the distance between the I steps of the Markov chain and the uniform distribution, it can be bounded by a certain sum of the power of the eigenvalues of the transition matrix. Okay. So I'm sorry, it's a bit quick because there's not much time to define what are all the eigenvalues, but the idea is that there is a precise way to control the convergence rate. And what's interesting is that, okay, because of this construction on the hyperplane arrangement, it's very general. Okay, and we also only mostly consider just monoids, the monoid structure of the faces of the arrangement. So Brown and Diaconis have investigated this framework of monoids called the left regular bands. And some other frameworks like affine arrangements of hyperplane, some other stuff called oriented matroids. Okay, so in general, the examples like the Braid arrangements, the Boolean arrangements are very combinatorial. But I think it would be interesting to understand in general some other examples to understand what is the associated combinatorics associated to simple examples of hyperplane arrangements. There are not many results in this direction. And it could be very interesting to just look at simple example and work out what is the combinatorics, what are the Markov chains, and so on. Okay, so let me stop here for the talk and ready to hear your questions.
Okay, thank you, Martin, for this nice talk. Please, are there some questions? So if you can go to slide 17, please. Slide
Yes.
17.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Is it possible to have two chambers F and J, such that F multiplied by C equals to J multiplied by C? It is possible
to have F, is it possible to have two terms in the sum?
Yes, two terms F and J, such that the product by C equal to the same C prime.
Yes, it's possible. Let me just go back to the example here. Of course, it's not obvious because you have to really think. It's not if you're not very acquainted with this monoid, it's difficult to have intuition about this monoid.
Okay.
But for example, you see that in the diagonal here, you have always two terms. So for example, what does it mean? Just recall, yes, for example, if you are in chamber one, if you multiply by A on the right, you still go into chamber one. And for B, it's the same. Okay, B times 1 with its product is still 1. Okay, so here you have A plus B. Okay. In the other elements, it's really the same thing.
And what represents A, B, C, D, E, F in this case? What represents? They are probabilities, but the constants, the probabilities A, B, C, D, and so on, what represents exactly?
Here it could be really anything. There are just some positive numbers, and the sum is 1. They are positive numbers, but there is no other requirements.
Okay. Okay.
And yes, it's a very general construction.
Okay.
If you have, of course, there are some. If you want invariance under a symmetric group, then you need to have some, like for example, F equals B, F equals T, and A equals C equals E, is an more natural thing to consider, and it's interesting to consider this case.
Okay. Okay. Slide 28, please.
28?
20. 20.
20. 20.
Yes. 20 here. And XI, okay. Then XL converges to the product distribution. Convergence,
Yes.
what kind of convergence? And convergence with respect to any parameter. The convergence of Xn in respect,
Yes.
with respect to n or to something else?
It's just with n. As n goes to infinity, the convergence is this. I don't know about the technical details, but probably in probability.
Convergence to product distribution from I to plus infinity or from I to n? What do you mean by this convergence?
Okay, I see what is the problem.
Okay.
I have a notation problem because n, in general, n is a dimension here. V belongs to R to the n.
Okay, it's fixed. So.
Okay, and I is my index here. For every I have this. Okay, but Xn, it should not be Xn. It should be something because n is a dimension. It should be x to xj, and when j goes to infinity, we converge to this.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Yes. Okay. N is fixed. It's a dimension. It's a thank you for noting this. It's very.
Okay.
Very pointed.
Slide 22, please. 22.
Mm-hmm.
Here we consider subject F1 to Fk, the random sequence of faces,
yes.
and you choose Fi is chosen such that Fi is not in F1 to Fi minus 1. But,
Yes.
But in your subject, F1 to Fk, you have, it's not possible to repeat the same element, no?
Excuse me, I didn't really catch.
Let F1 to Fk. In this family, you can have, for example, F3 two times. We repeat F3 two times or not? I think yes.
No. I mean, here I'm implicitly assuming that K is a cardinality of the support of mu, which means like every element is just appear once. K is a cardinality of the support here.
Okay, but in the line before,
Yes.
Fi is chosen according to mu.
Yes.
Conditionally, to Fi is not in F1 to Fi minus 1, but this
Yes.
condition is evident, is sure, this condition. Fi is not in F1 to Fi minus 1 because the elements are different 2 by 2.
Okay. Well, this second, just imagine. I see what you mean. It's not very formal, but just somehow it should be written as an algorithm. Okay. So it means just consider the first step.
Okay.
Just consider the first thing here.
Okay, I understand. And
then automatically the second step, the second thing will follow because you have done the first step until you have taken everything.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And you are sure that your algorithm stops at some time?
Well, it should be, yeah, with probability 1 because you know it's supposed to be it's a finite set. So at some point, when with a larger number of steps, you take out every element will be taken at least once.
So we cannot, we can minimize the number of steps of these algorithms.
I don't know. Well, I don't know about the implementation detail, but yeah, but certainly it should be very efficient.
Okay. Another question in the last. Is it true that x multiplied by y multiplied by z multiplied by x equals to x multiplied by z multiplied by x multiplied by z? So x multiplied by multiplication, yes, here, the associative.
Yes.
X multiplied by y multiplied by z, and you multiply again by x. Is it the same as x multiplied by y multiplied by z? You understand my question? If you multiply 2 times by x, but not.
If it's okay, let me just check in the chat, right?
Okay.
You ask if x, y, z, x equals to x, y, z?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so this will be true because here you can, because it's a good question because here we use associativity. Just write it as x times y times z between parentheses.
Okay.
Okay, and then you can apply the same axiom x, y, x equals x, y, and you get that this is x times y times z. Okay, and of course, okay, this is on the. Of course, it's not trivial because associativity is not trivial. You have to prove it, and then using it, you have this property. And indeed, in the proof of the theorem, this is what we need, because in between the two elements of Aj and Fj prime, here, this is what we need. So I can that's a very good question. Thank you.
Okay. So I have a question in the chat from, I think from Elias. Last slide, slide 33. Slide 33. You can go to slide 33.
Slide
33.
50.
33.
Excuse me?
33, last slide.
Yeah, at the very end. Yeah.
Yes. his question is which hyperplane exactly we arranging the lattice and how.
Okay, so this is a part of the talk that I was not really explaining because I was a bit short on time. But the point is that this lattice is the following. The lattice is this. You take all the possible intersections of the hyperplane in the arrangement. Okay, just take any subset of the arrangement, subset of your hyperplane, take the intersection. So what you get is a collection of subspaces, not just hyperplane, subspaces. We have an order relation, which is inclusion. And in the case of the braid arrangement, what you get is a lattice of set partitions from the combinatorial point of view.
Okay.
So this is it. And then there is this construction with that you consider the Möbius function on the lattice, and you can get the eigenvalues.
Okay. Are there other questions, please?
Yes, please.
Yes. Yes, I'll start.
Yes.
Thank you for this nice talk. Actually, I have two questions. The first one is about whether there are results concerning the behavior of the chain, recurrence, transience, ergodicity.
So I think everything is automatic in the separable case. You know, separability was a condition to get the convergence with a uniform distribution. If we don't have this separability hypothesis, there is no recurrence because, for example, it's possible to always stay on one side of the same hyperplane. So there will be no recurrence unless you restrict to a smaller set. But at least under the separability hypothesis, we have all the questions are settled, should be settled in a very nice way.
Okay, if I understand, the separability guarantees the existence of or the unicity of the invariant measure, yeah?
Yes.
Or even the convergence.
Excuse me?
I mean, does the separability guarantees the existence?
Yes.
And unicity of the invariant measure? Of course, the existence, yes, but the unicity, or even it implies the convergence.
Yes, maybe I'm not
because
completely sure.
The existence of the unicity of the invariant measure does not imply the convergence.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, my second question, if you can go please to the last slide. Well, the last one. Okay, this one. Can we have this inequality because the total variation is known to be involved in the Markov-Dobrushin inequality? Is this inequality related to the Markov-Dobrushin one?
To the what? Sorry?
Markov-Dobrushin inequality.
I don't know about this. It's possible. I don't know. I cannot really answer this question.
Okay, maybe later.
I'm sorry about this, but maybe just one small comment about this is that what is really interesting from my point of view, what is really interesting in this topic is that there is a mixture of different things. There is the probability point of view, but as you saw, there is also the geometric point of view with the hyperplanar arrangements and everything. There is also a more algebraic point of view with the algebras of the symmetric group algebras and everything. So maybe sometimes it might feel that it's not going very far in the details in the probability point of view, but it's because it's going in very different direction. It's and that makes this topic interesting too.
Yeah, it's interesting. Thank you.
Thank you for your start for these nice questions. The rest of the question of Elias about the hyperplane in the last slide, because that, yes, but I mean for a semi-modular lattice, what is the ground and independent set?
Excuse me?
If you can go to chat, please. The last question of Elias.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes, I see. One more message.
Yes. Yes, but I mean.
What is the ground on the independent sets? I don't really know. It's probably possible to write something explicit.
Can you give more details about your question, Elias, please?
Excuse me?
I talked to Elias from the building. Yes, Elias, you can give your question. Yes.
Thank you. So just you're talking about matroids and like you have the atomic, like it's atomistic and it's supposed to be semi-modular. Now it's semi-modular and it gives you this property actually gives you the associative thing you were talking about. And like for the arrangement, like the geometric arrangement you have, it comes from that. And instead of like considering like a symmetric group, I think you could even have like a dihedral group because it's almost the same thing. Now, when you have a matroid, you're supposed to have a pair, like a ground set and like an independent set, because that's what forms that. So I was just asking if you're like if you're rearranging a lattice over a hyperplane, like in your case, what would be that pair like you're working on, like the ground and the, because I'm just interested in maybe arranging something like that, and I wanted to know what would be the the pair to work on.
I'm not sure if I can answer the question, but maybe small comment. Okay, about different groups. So in general, well, the brain arrangement is associated with a symmetric group, but in general, we can consider reflection groups, finite reflection groups, which are some kind of finite Coxeter groups. And in particular, the dihedral groups are the two-dimensional reflection groups. But
Perfect.
we can also do more general things like signed permutations instead of just permutations. It could be interesting to to study signed permutations. About oriented matroids, I don't know much about these particulars, but the point is that oriented matroid, just one small command, is just a way to formalize this kind of stuff here. Like you have a collection of signs which are 0 plus or minus, and there is the product is defined on this collection of signs. And oriented matroids are just a way to axiomatize these things. I don't.
Right. Thank you so much, all. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for your yes for your questions. Are there other questions, please? If not, we have to thank again our speaker, Mathieu, and see you after 2 weeks. Thank you, Mathieu.